All right, welcome back. We
Hi.
hi
I
are in Salt Lake.
am not a lifespan integration training. It's super cool. The brain is a cool thing.
Mhm. So you're there, I'm here, and here we are again. Show number 7, Mechanic to Millionaire podcast. Show number 7. I think we start putting the date. I don't know why. What is it? April,
It's
May
May
6th, May
6th. It
6th,
might as well
2022.
2022. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get started. There was something I was going to say before we did get started, but I don't remember now. All right. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll just pull up. I think we're into the second paragraph.
Made it far.
Yeah, we're getting far. Making some headway here. So, yeah, chapter 1. In what book are we in? We are in The Creative Process in the Individual,
By Thomas Troward.
Thomas Troward.
Mhm.
So, the last show, just talking about like going back to again the principle over precedent. The triumph of principle over precedent doesn't means that we can make something new of our lives. We don't have to rearrange the order of our current lives. Like we can go for a fantasy. Bob Proctor says, turn the fantasy into a fact. And if it's a fantasy, then that's your greatest dream, the highest, grandest version, which probably wouldn't really like your life. If you haven't been working on this, maybe you have, but if you haven't been, then your life may be completely different in that fantasy realm. And these principles that we're going to bring forth in this book will teach us how to make that new fantasy into a fact, which means your life would be totally different. It's not just a rearrangement of the stuff you already have. That's like the teaching in the Bible, putting new wine into old bottles. It would destroy the bottles and it would leak. So we don't be afraid to think of something new. For me, in the beginning, new was like dinner and a movie. Like I couldn't even go out to lunch at work, while all the other mechanics did. There was kind of like I was envied that. I was jealous, not jealous like in a way that was spiteful, just like I yearned to be able to do what they were doing, go out to lunch every day. Looking now and learning the things that I've learned, that was probably not such a bad thing that I wasn't able to go out and buy fast food every day. But that was something that I yearned to do that I wasn't able to. And so in the beginning, as I started learning these principles, the dreams were going to dinner and a movie. And then that grew into buying new clothes for the kids when they needed them. Rather than hand-me-down clothes, coming in to save the day from relatives, and then being able to buy new clothes every once in a while.
Christmas.
So those were the new things that weren't a part. I wasn't rearranging something. It was something that would be totally new. I didn't know how, and we're going to just put that out there right now. You don't have to know the how. You just need to see the end as an already accomplished fact. And we'll get into that as we go throughout the book, but don't worry about how you're going to start to go to a dinner and a movie and trying to figure that out. And so we'll get more into that as we go along, but just when you're dreaming about it, don't think about how you're going to make that fantasy become a reality. Just get clarity with what that fantasy is. I think that's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah. And I think the word fantasy, or even just a wish fulfilled, words about something or even thoughts about something that doesn't exist yet in our lives can seem really woo-woo sometimes to people, and it can seem like it's impossible, or that we're going into some, I don't know, sorcery or something. And I was listening to Working with the Law the other day, um, and he said a desire for something cannot exist unless it has the possibility to manifest itself. That's paraphrasing. And in scriptures it says, things like desire comes from God, Desire is given to us as a gift by God, and he only gives us desire when there's a prepared way for us to have the thing that we desire. And that right there is faith, believing that it exists, like the ability to do whatever it is that we desire to have or to be, especially whatever it is that we desire, is there and it's possible. And that the work is to keep our focus on the expectation that that desire will be received. And a lot of times and I talked about, I think a couple of shows ago, that a lot of times we place our desire in a person or a circumstance of our life or a thing that maybe it's because it already exists in our world. Like we talked about last podcast, we can rearrange things in our world all day long that we already have. And that other people, circumstances around us, the environment, our world, it's not going to be predictable. It can't be counted on. But God can always be counted on. He doesn't change. He's always there. And again, if a desire exists in us, maybe that would be a better word or a safer word to use than fantasy, even though it's not that fantasy is wrong. But if it's too hard for you to use the word fantasy and to believe that, then just use desire and know that your desires were given to you by someone who has already made it possible, that it will be manifested. We just have to keep our focus on the expectation of receiving that.
Yeah, I made a note here while you were talking, just right along those same lines. So manifesting something new, how is none of our concern? In the beginning, it's none of our concern if we don't know something about what will lead us to that, even though we may not know all the specifics, like how am I going to get a pay raise where I'm currently working, or how is this going to go through when I don't see any way that I have the money to invest in that to, fulfill that thing and that I really want. It will become part of our concern, but that's not until it reveals itself in the way of, if need be, a new opportunity. And it may be closely related to current circumstances, or it may be something different and better and totally new, like it was in my case. Where something came that I'd never even heard of it before. And Carrie was the one that discovered it. And then that became that vehicle that we had never known before. We had never heard of it. And yet it fulfilled all of that fantasy that I had. And for those that hadn't listened to the season 1 of The Mechanic to Millionaire, where we went through the science of getting rich, I did a dream book at a dream workshop. And I was taught at that dream workshop to write my goals in a way that I had never been taught before. And that was like what we're talking about, write down the fantasy. And we didn't get to this point yet, but write down the fantasy as though it's already happened. And so that's what I did. And I read it twice a day with pictures and paragraphs describing what that fantasy was like now that I'm living it. And then a way revealed itself. I didn't know the how. I never went to the how. I thought that I knew something about how that might be manifested, those dreams, but I wasn't attached to that. And I read the book, the dream book, as though it was already a fact. And so that was utilizing a principle that brought the thing to me that would actually fulfill it, where the current thing that I thought was related to those dreams coming true wasn't really the vehicle. But I didn't know that, but God did. God's universe did, in the way of cause and effect and the way these principles work. God has woven into the fabric of the entire universe and our lives these principles which work on cause and effect. So the cause was, I wrote down the fantasy in a way that I never had before. I read it every day, and I created the feelings that were in harmony with, as though I already had that fantasy as a reality. That facilitated a principle of effect. And the effect was the thing revealed itself, that I didn't know what it was. I'd never heard of it before. And that's using that faith, right? That's exercising that faith and believing that our prayers have been answered as we pray them.
Yeah, I was thinking of that same example. I was You said we had some idea of what we thought it might be, right? When we created our dream books, and I was actually working a booth um, for that vehicle that at least I thought it would come through. And at first was closed off to the people that were trying to get my attention about this new thing. And I listened to them just at first to get them to be quiet because they were being annoying in my mind because I was so focused on what I thought was the vehicle. And then because I decided to be open and for a different reason than I thought, that's when my mind opened and the feeling came that like, oh my goodness, there's something here, and went and got you. And then you almost like were not ready to receive it either. And, went to throw the card away. And then because of the work that especially you had been doing by reading that dream book every day, I was being a brat about mine, but we'll talk about that another time. But you were reading it every day. You were calling in the powers, that be. You were
Into
like,
action. Yeah.
yeah, you were focusing on them. You were reading them every day. And so, when that opportunity came, at first we thought we had an expectation in something else. And that thinking stuff or that power spoke to both of our hearts. And it was like, let's take a look at this. And it was the vehicle, right? So the vehicle showed up because the expectation was focused on receiving the desire. I remember
Yeah.
you say, I'm quitting my job in 6 months. And it was pretty much 6 months from the time that that you decided to get in that vehicle to the day that you decided to quit your job. It was pretty close to 6 months. I think about that all
Yeah.
the
It was
time.
pretty amazing. We even ended
Yeah.
up buying a house in the same neighborhood as the dream house that we put in the book. In this book, I think Trollword says when we do that, when we live that fantasy as an already accomplished fact, it's called the law of assumption, is what Neville Goddard calls it. He says we're calling into action latent powers which we really and truly have no idea how great those powers are, but we facilitate them and we put them into action. So that thing that caused that booth to be right next to yours was no coincidence. The conversations, the feelings that you were having in correlation with what we were doing and I was doing, as we were doing as a couple, as a unit of one, was all part of that. There was none of that was a coincidence. And so we called into action these greater powers that people are waiting for God to institute in their life. But you have to take the first step in bringing those powers, those latent powers, which people are trying to bring into action through just simple prayer. But like Neville Goddard says, prayer is not about asking and getting. There's a way that we prepare ourselves to receive those things that we truly desire. And prayer is more about getting clarity with them. But then there's some other subtle principles that we have to understand how to direct the faculties of our mind to bring those into action in our behalf, which all of it doesn't negate God at all. It's all part of God's amazing, wonderful, miraculous, universe. So
Yeah. And not to beat this into the ground, but I just realized something that so a lot of the stories in the beginning, and even that story we just told about, Dave was the one that had the dream book, and he was the one causing these to come into action for our family for a while. I mean, I played a role, but I had something recently that happened for me that as it was happening, I was like realizing all along that I'm like, I'm I'm doing this. And it wasn't even like I was striving. So when I graduated from school, in order to become licensed as a marriage and family therapist, I have to work 4,000 hours for someone else. And so I had been doing my internship for someone else for a year. And before that, I'd been a stay-at-home mom and a network marketer, that I had the freedom to write my own schedule for a really long time. And it felt really restricting to me to think about having to work for somebody else for 4,000 hours, which is about 2 years if it was full time. And I'm like, I don't want to work full time. I don't want to work for somebody else. And I didn't like the way that felt. And it didn't take long for me to realize and to remember that I'm focusing on the obstacle and focusing on what I don't want. And as soon as I reminded myself that, I felt myself just relax. And it's been so cool because I'm still just in the first, what's it, May? So the first 6 months of those 2 years. Um, and I've been able to design my working for someone else as if I'm working for myself. And
Mhm.
I get to write my own hours. And it feels like, and I even, it worked out that I get to actually work from my own office as a satellite office to the person that I work for. And it was really cool because it didn't take me long of feeling constricted. And I'm like, no, this isn't how my life is. This isn't how I'm choosing my life. And so I just like breathed and relaxed and just kept my eye on the ball. I finally learned how to play baseball, Dave. I
You kept your
kept
eye
my
on the
eye on the
threads.
ball and yeah, and I remind myself, I mean, I feel it all the time of how good it feels to, even within the confines of the rules and the way things are set up, I'm still able to live the life that I want to live the way I want to live it, because I chose to look at the desire and the goal and the possibilities rather than the obstacle and the obstruction in my way. So
Yeah, there's while you're talking, I'm just because this is so practical, right? This is like just a practical circumstance in your everyday life that you're going along, you're doing the do, you're getting your degrees, and you're getting involved in student, what is it called? Not student teaching, but internship. And so everything's just going along, right? And we just kind of get in that groove. We get, I wouldn't call it a rut, but it is kind of a rut. We just get into a groove. We get on these tracks. And then all of a sudden, you realize this thing in the middle of your normal everyday livingness. But you feel off. So you just make this, what I want to get at here is what we're teaching is not something that's out of the ordinary. It's actually ordinary to realize when we're cramped up and to unkink it. And he says it in here somewhere. I just want to see if I could jump ahead a little bit. Um, so, therefore, means that all individual exercise of this power is the particular application of a universal power which itself operates creatively on its own account, independently of these individual applications. And the harmony between the various individual application is brought about by the individuals bringing their own particular action into line with this independent creative action of the original power. It is, in fact, another application of let's see, he's getting a little bit away from it here. He calls it the personal factor, which we started talking about it right there, right? There's two different powers. There's ours, which is there's a creative power of the universe, and then there's the independent personal factor. And let me just see right there. So what we want is to introduce our own personal factor into the realm of unseen causes. This is the big thing. And if it is possible at all, it must be by some sequence of cause and effect. So what you did was like, it's so natural. It should be so ordinary as a daily part of our existence, but we've gotten so far away from it because people are letting the outer world influence the inner world. So what we're wanting to pursue here is getting back to our true nature. Because right now we're about as far away as a society, as far away from our true nature as we could possibly be. We want to be reborn into this spiritual nature. And as I was thinking about, the whole Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve and the fall, where the senses kind of took over, the five senses. And what we want is a spiritual rebirth where the spiritual senses take over and we get back to our original nature. And that's what the whole getting back to heaven on earth is all about, is that we get back to that spiritual inclinations and make that a part of our ordinary, everyday, fundamental experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. One of my favorite things to do right now is, driving down the road and seeing signs of gas prices that are like crazy and noticing them, and then turning my thoughts and noticing all the wildflowers in the fields and all of the stars in the sky and all the raindrops falling from the sky, and choosing to see abundance and God's abundance, and that I'm not like being controlled by the world's economy, quote unquote. And it's, I live
Mhm.
in God's economy, which is abundance. There's no such thing as scarcity in the universe. And it's just really, it's a fun game that I play all the time. Every day as I'm driving, I just have a good time looking for God's abundance everywhere I go. So
Yeah. And that's getting back to, and he talks about it here, a better order of things. And I think
yeah,
we talked about that a little bit before, a better
we did.
order of things.
That's what I look of as the flow of the source that's already there. And my personal factor is just choosing to look at it and think about it in a different way.
Yeah. I like arrange a different order of things. And right now, like my arranging isn't really much different. It's just a higher level of what I've already arranged my life over these last 17 years. Pretty amazing. But there's always a next level. So in the beginning, it might be a total arrangement, like everything that's going on in my life, like I don't want. There's so much of that surrounds us. Those are those weeds. And as we learn this and we get better at it, we're able to eliminate more of the weeds with a new identity, a new fantasy. And that's the growth. So I talked about the whiteboard. As we accomplish those things on our whiteboard, the next whiteboard is able to eliminate more of the weeds and bring in more of the flowers. What are those? That's the growth. And so there's not like any finish line. It's just a continual growth in livingness that we're able to experience. And the growth is in being able to eliminate more of the weeds in that next level and incorporate more of the beauties that we'd like to have. And that's a personal factor. Yours are going to be different than mine. We'll have some similarities for sure, but there's going to be some also differences that make us unique. So here now, the first thing in any investigation is to have some idea of what you are looking for. So this is where Bob Proctor says, I'll ask people and sitting in the front row, if I gave you an unlimited amount of income every month, no strings attached, what would you do with that? And they're like, well, I haven't really thought about it. Like, they haven't thought about what they want their fantasy life to be like. And he says it just is like, it's incredible to think that people don't know in detail because most people are focused on what they don't want. So here he's saying, you have to have some kind of idea of what you want to have at least some notion of the general direction in which you go. And he uses a really funny example here. Just as you would not go up a tree to find fish, though you would for birds' eggs, well, the general direction in which we all want to go is that of getting more out of life than we have ever gotten out of it. And as we understand these principles, the principles will actually give you the permission to do that even more freely and with zest and power behind it and energy behind it, because the principles explain why it is, just like gravity. We could really study gravity and realize why it is we don't float off into space, but even the little bit of understanding that we have about it keeps us safe very effectively. So we want to be more alive in ourselves and to get all sorts of improved conditions in our environment. So we could start at that lowest level of the pyramid of self-actualization, which is survival, right? Clothing, food, shelter, and then get to that next level of having some extra income at the end of the month, having some nice living conditions where it's comfortable and that we're not stressed about our finances. So that would, as you're thinking about that next direction or the general direction that you want to be going in, start writing out the specifics. And somebody taught me this early on, and it was separate a lined sheet of paper into the don't wants and the do wants. Don't start with the do wants. Get all the don't wants that you are familiar with, very familiar with in your life. So lack money, there's not enough money for the end of the month. Can't go on the vacations. Let's say no vacation, or describe the vacations that you take are very lackluster, right? They're not like awesome vacations that you're like, they're not dream vacations. They're like, we're going to my parents' house. They live in Anaheim, so we can go to Disneyland. We can stay at their house. So all of those things, right? Clothes, not enough money to buy clothes and the clothes that I'd like to wear. Then what you do is you just do the exact opposite on the other side. So I want more money. So I want to take awesome dream vacations. So I want to be able to buy the clothes without having to look at the price tag. I want to be able to go and buy what I want on the menu without looking at the price. So you would just, that's a great way of helping you start to see which direction you would like to go in. As you start doing that, you start to resonate with some of those things with more clarity. And there's a picture and a view that starts to appear as you break down this side into even more and more bullet points. Anything you want to add on that right there?
Yeah, just depending on, I mean, there are some people that have a hard time even writing the opposite of what they don't want when it comes to like things. And, like we've had so many people like, I don't know what it is that I want. So this is a really good strategy to do it. And for me, it's almost more effective for me to focus on how I don't want to feel and then switch it to how I do want to feel. Instead of trying to design my dream house in my mind, I had a harder time doing that. I think it had a lot to do with temperament types, which I've talked about before. Like we all are motivated by different things and we think differently. And so for some people, that maybe you're more of a visual learner than someone else. I'm very much a feeler. So how do I want to feel? So with like, how do I feel when I can't take vacations or when I can't buy clothes? Like I feel stressed, I feel trapped. So what's the opposite of that? I want to feel peaceful. I want to feel free. And I focus on the feeling of how I want to feel. That for me helps to align me with the flow. And neither one is wrong. I'd like to expand, like if your brain is going, but I don't know, then maybe go to the feeling. Maybe you're a feeler.
Yeah. And other things, something else that's came up for me, maybe somebody who's listening to this or going to listen to it needs to hear this. Like if you like the place you work at, because for me, I didn't want to have to work for somebody else in the environment that I was working in. I didn't want to have to go in because they made us go in every other Saturday. So, more and more of my life was being dedicated to a job that, wasn't my dream job. And so, but some people might have a job where they love that job and maybe they need more income. So, I might have things on here that are my don't wants, like I want to own my own life. I want to own my own business or something like that, where somebody else would be, but I love my job. That doesn't mean you have to get rid of your job to get rid of your don't wants. So,
I love what I do. Like I literally would do it all day long for nothing. I love it so much. And, so it was like, and I want to do it when I want, as much as I want, in my own off, where I want. And so that freedom was a really big thing for me. I didn't want to feel restricted. And that's what I was like, ugh. So it was the freedom of like, that really helps me to stay in it.
Yeah, so as you're doing that, whether you're thinking of it through feelings or through writing it down, like I just showed, get out of the box. Don't keep yourself in a box. Anything's possible, so play it on that level. I mean, there's so many movies around imagination, and I was going to say that earlier. When we have an imagination that's so creative, why do we restrict ourselves to what our current reality is, our reality, when we have this powerful imagination? So like there's so many movies like Mary Poppins and, against Star Wars. There's just so many things. Get out of that box as you start to think of what direction you're wanting to go.
Think of it, if you're having a hard time coming up with your own, find a movie that makes you feel the way you want to feel and use that. I like that. That's really
You can use role models too, people who are living a kind of life that like, wow, I really like the way that person's representing how life can be lived, and pick some things from different people and piece them together in your own way. Okay, so we want to be more alive in ourselves and to get all sorts of improved conditions in our environment. And we're just finishing up here. We have 1 minute. However, happily, any of us may be circumstance, we can all conceive something still better. And that's so true. It doesn't matter where you're at. There's always a next level. You don't see the next level until you reach the one that is the current level, right? So at any rate, and don't worry if it's like seems trivial. If it's a deal to you, then make it important and be serious about it and write it down. There's nothing too trivial and there's nothing too great either. Or at any rate, we should like to make our present good permanent. And that's kind of like, there's a lot of things that I want to maintain that we have right now. And then there's some pieces of it that I want to like take it to the next level. But we've been working on it for 17 years. And since we shall find as our studies advanced that the prospect of increasing possibilities keeps opening out more and more widely before us, we may say that what we are in search of is this secret of getting more out of life in a continually progressive degree. That's a good place to stop right there. No finish line. There's no hurry. We're eternal beings. We'll be on this, I believe, this journey for a long, long time. And let's just get started on it now. For sure, the next 6 months is going to go by, and we could say either I'm glad I did because look at the progress I've made, or I wish I have. I bet I could have made a lot of progress by now. All right. So, any closing remarks?
Progress is the name of the game. Why-
Oops, you muted. We lost you for a second there. Progress is the name of the game. Is that what you said?
Yeah, it's the name of the game. It's a big part of why we're here. So we might as well continually do it while we're alive, right? And
Yep.
continually improve on that. So yeah, I love that.
Amen. Amen.
All
All
right.
right. So we'll see you on the next show. Have a great evening, great morning, whatever it is, wherever you're at. Have a great one.
And happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there, all the women out there.
Oh, that's right. It's tomorrow. Bye bye.
Bye.